All right, thank you and welcome to the truck safety advocacy session. If you meant to be here, this is session 6B, and we're happy to have you with us. We're going to go ahead and get started. And first and foremost, obviously, we want to thank our host for allowing us to be here. It's a privilege and an honor, and we're excited to share with you some of the things that we think are pretty important in the world of truck safety. Additionally, this is on me, I did not advise our AV team that videos are going to be played. So they are scrambling to make sure that that works when the timing comes. So I think it would make them feel great if you clap after that first video is played, a rousing round of applause to honor their frantic work so you can enjoy videos. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we'll introduce our speakers. At some point, the slides may come up, but we'll just go ahead. I have Lee Jackson here directly to my right. He is a board member with the Crash Foundation, which is part of the Truck Safety Coalition. And he has been involved with crash reconstruction as far back as 1988 with the Fort Worth Police Department. For over 2 decades, he served in the traffic division where he investigated fatalities, injury, and property damage crashes. He then spent 7 years in the traffic investigation unit. He retired from the police department in 2010 and has turned his attention to education and consulting in crash investigation and reconstruction on a full-time basis. This gentleman in 2012 won the first national ARAS 360 forensic animation contest, has generated numerous animations used in litigation. He is also a member and current president of the Texas Association of Accident Reconstruction Association Professionals. In 2023, Lee Jackson was appointed by the Secretary of Transportation to serve as a motor crash investigator on the Advisory Committee on Underride Protection, commonly known as the ACUP. And that reminds me, this is a great time for disclosure that any views that are expressed by any members who happen to sit on the ACUP are their own and do not represent the views of the Advisory Committee on Underride Protection. All right, we also have Miss Jennifer Tierney here in the middle. She's an incredible woman who has been leading truck safety advocacy for over 30 years. She literally led the charge in securing the mandate for a conspicuity tape on all heavy commercial vehicle trailers. Her expertise has been sought several times for governmental truck safety committees, such as MCSAC. In 2018, she testified before the committee on the House Committee, on Transportation and Infrastructure. She also sits on the DOT Advisory Committee for Underride Protection as a representative of the Truck Safety Coalition. And last but not least, we have Mr. Eric Teo, and he is the Director of Statistical Services at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. I'm going to go off script. He's brilliant, super smart, so ask him lots of questions. Beyond his statistical role, he has authored numerous studies quantifying the state of highway safety and identifying ways to improve it. His own research has focused on motorcycles, large trucks, and passenger vehicles. He holds master's and bachelor's degrees in mathematics from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. So thank you, panel. With that, we're going to embark on simply a conversation as it pertains to truck safety on a number of different topics. So it's going to be somewhat free-flowing here. And as is our practice here at the Truck Safety Coalition, we always think it's critical that victims of large truck crashes have an opportunity to have their voice amplified and kind of bring that human element to these very important safety discussions. So with our first question, I'm going to give it to Jennifer. If you could briefly share with us kind of about, we've heard a little bit about your background, but what brings you here today and how would you assess the current state of truck safety?
This journey started for me, and it was one that I certainly never in a million years could have anticipated. In 1983, I was 27 years old. I had not been married but a few years. I had no children at that time. And on a Friday night, I got a knock on the door, and it was my brother-in-law telling me that my dad was dead. And I thought of a million reasons that could be, one of which him getting on a ladder, doing something crazy that could have killed him, but it was none of those things. It was a side underride crash. He had worked in management with Western Electric his whole life, and he had what I called a toy farm. There wasn't anything really being farmed on it, but it was land. And he was on his way out to that property, and a truck driver had brought a truck home with him and was trying to back it into a field beside his house in a curve. None of the 3 lights that were required on the side of the trailer were operating, and of course at that time there was no reflective tape. So Dad came around a curve, he hit the side of the trailer, he went under it, he went 41 feet, came out on the other side, and was still in his lane of traffic, but he died of massive, massive head injuries. I did make the choice to see my dad after this crash happened. And I will not, you can only imagine, but you can't really imagine how severe the injuries are when someone's head and neck slams into the side of a tractor trailer or the rear of a tractor trailer. There's nothing really between your head and that vehicle except the windshield. And nobody ever thinks that that'll happen to them. You all are here and you have a lot of experience in this area. But in your heart, you think, that could never happen to me. It could never happen to my child, to my husband, to my wife, to somebody that I love. But it could. And the very people that are stopping us from doing this are the very people that it could happen to them as well. So as luck would have it, I did hook up with 3M Company and met with them and started working with them on the reflective tape issue. And then, fortunately enough, the organization CRASH was started, Citizens for Reliable and Safe Highways, started by Joan Claybrook in the early 90s. I started working with them on this issue. CRASH at some point partnered with Parents Against Tired Truckers. So the Truck Safety Coalition is made up of the 2 organizations, CRASH and PAT. And it was through working with them and working with 3M that we got the tape done, but it took 10 years. 10 years that people died and hit those trucks where the visibility of that tape could have prevented that. I have met with numerous secretaries of transportation, Pena, Slater, Mineta, LaHood, trying to get this, resolve this issue. And the Truck Safety Coalition means the world to the victims and survivors. That's who we represent and we try to help. And these are people, I lost my dad. There are people that lost their whole family. There's people that their sister, their brother-in-law, all their children were killed. There's children that are killed. This is an issue that has a solution, but we just have to make it happen. And that's why I'm honored that you all are here. It thrills me to see so many people here that care about safety. And I'm literally begging and depending on you all to help us to make this happen. The Truck Safety Coalition is the go-to group for victims and survivors of crashes. We support them in all kinds of ways, and we work with Congress to try to improve safety with regards to large trucks.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Eric Lee, current state of truck safety, kind of opening thoughts?
I would say there are way too many people killed in truck crashes, about 4,700 in 2021, the latest year of data. I would say my organization, we're not advocates, we're not allowed to lobby, but what we do is do studies to figure out what works and doesn't work to make the problems in highway safety better. And we put that information into the hands of everybody, including consumers, government, and advocates. Yep.
Second to none, obviously, by the way, the work of IIHS. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Lee?
I've been a reconstructionist for several years, decades actually, and we did some underride tests in North Carolina just a few months ago, and I don't hesitate to tell people I showed up skeptical, but we conducted numerous tests at 40 miles an hour of cars that would normally have gone right underneath the trailer, but the Underride Guard worked. I showed up skeptical, but I left impressed. I wasn't sure how it was all going to turn out, but the Underride Guards work. There's no doubt in my mind about that anymore. All the tests are available if anybody wants the information on them. Nobody is trying to say that if a car hits a truck at 70 miles an hour, the occupants are going to survive. It's just not going to happen. The body can't handle that kind of rapid deceleration. So we have to work Underride Guards in concert with conspicuity reflective tape. A lot of people are under the impression that the red and white reflective tape on the side of trailers is good for the life of the trailer, and it's just not. The sun takes its toll on it, it gets beat up, for numerous reasons. So that reflective tape has to be replaced every once in a while. There's several different things that can be addressed from that. They're not that difficult things to fix. Underride guards have been around in Europe for over 40 years, and there's just no reason that we don't have them on trailers. There are some obstacles in dealing with them, but they're all easily overcome.
So Lee, on this topic, could you, just for everyone's benefit, they probably are already aware, but what exactly is an underride crash? Could you speak to that?
Sure. The NHTSA defines it as any time a vehicle goes underneath any portion of a truck or a trailer. It's just that easy. I mean, it kind of defines itself. Now, depending on engine severity, or the speeds will dictate how severe that accident can be. Because if you ever looked at the dimensions, your typical passenger car, the hood is just a couple inches lower than the frame rail on the side of a trailer. That's why it so easily penetrates all the way up to the windshield and engages the occupants of the car. And nobody can withstand that. If you go underride a truck at 40, 50 miles an hour, there's just not going to be any survivors.
And all those safety features don't activate.
Right.
In the passenger vehicle, as a result, as they're not designed for that sort of an impact. Just real quick, these pamphlets we have available here at the front table if you want to take some with you. We will touch on some of this content that is there throughout the course of the presentation. But we've obviously touched on underride first. It'll be one of multiple issues we touch on here as part of this panel. Broadly speaking, underride protections, if folks have been paying attention, have seen a lot of focus and energy in Congress, in the media, in the trucking space, right? It's generated a lot of energy in this current moment. And I'm curious what you think about that. Why is that? Why is this moment the time that this has finally come to fruition as a serious issue? Anyone? Jennifer?
Well, history shows that there are things that can be done for this. It's a problem that's been recognized as far back as 1953, which I wasn't even born in 1953. And it's moved through the process, but for various reasons, it's not been pushed through the process. So the history's there that it works, and there are things that we can do, and it's an important issue because it just keeps happening. And they're some of the worst crashes that you can imagine. In 1967, this was probably the most famous, if you want to say that word, famous underride crash was, some of you may not know who this is, but Jane Mansfield died in an underride crash. It was a rear underride crash. Her children were in the car with her. They survived, but she and other occupants in the car did die. You would have thought that would have gotten somebody's attention, but then we moved on to 1969. NHTSA proposes a guard and predicts 1969, years before my dad got killed, they predicted that side underride guards would be added. Well, here we are, 1967, it's almost 2024. They still haven't done it. It still hasn't been done. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, you're talking 70 years that these crashes, almost 71 years. The time is now. The technology's there. We just have to make the effort to get it done, and it's going to take everybody in this room helping us to try to get it done.
So Jennifer, I'm going to chime in real quick and kick it over to Eric. From everyone's context, one of the legitimate problems surrounding this issue is the lack of data, despite the fact that it's been a known issue as far back as 1953. And so I would also argue, editorializing here, a lack of interest in collecting the data. And the OIG, the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General, slammed DOT on this failure in a 2017 report and issued a recommendation or a corrective action to actually collect said data, which is the process has been kicked off through the Model Minimum Uniform Crash Criteria revision that is ongoing to make that a possibility. But essentially, the argument is, well, we don't really know the scope and scale of the problem, so we don't know the cost benefit of the proposed change. Eric, as our data expert, I wonder what you would be able to share around the updates to the MUC, and what is the quality? Can we make any inferences based on the data we already have?
So part of the problem is, in a lot of cases, it's not coded at all, never mind the accuracy of it to begin with. But model minimum muck is a recommendation for how states design their police crash report forms. So in the latest draft revision, now there is a recommendation to include a variable coding underride. I took a look at it. It's brief and simple and straightforward. How well it will work is to be determined. One thing we've discovered in our research is even in databases like FARS, the fatality database nationally, that does code it, it's often not very well coded. When we match it to a study called Large Truck Crash Causation Study that included photographs and all kinds of in-depth stuff, the photographs was a very, very useful tool for us for identifying underride.
Right. Very helpful. So they haven't been recorded, but some states, right, it's an option, and many of you may know you get better access to some grant dollars if you use the MUC that the federal government hopes you to use. 17 states, though, there's nothing that stops you from exceeding that, right? So 17 states do have some form of a element for underride crashes and how to document that. And one of the projects we're embarking on is helping states, choose to include that form, or that field, I should say, that's going to be recommended by the MUC, and also teaching state and local law enforcement how to recognize, identify, and record a crash. And Lee, I know that this maybe isn't the best tool, but could you walk us through what we're looking at and how that might help kind of bridge this gap?
Sure. Each state has their own designed crash report. They used to be called accident reports, but now they're called crash reports. Each state has their own. When officers are going through the academy, they're trained on how to fill out these reports. So it's really just a very simple ad. And in the state of Texas, we redo our crash report every couple of years. I mean, it's not been stagnant. They've improved it over the course of time. So this would just be including one more check, as you can see on this document here, recording underride crashes. It's as simple as a yes or a no. Either it did or it didn't. And that's the first stage in collecting data that can be used to actually get a good count on these kind of crashes.
Right, perfect. We're going to transition here, and I think I'm going to go, well, let's go ahead and look at the right panel there of the trifold. You see the rear underride crash, and these are IIHS photos. Want to be sure to give credit where credit is due. Really leading the way on testing and impact testing. I mean, look, it's just true. They've done more impact testing than NHTSA has. I don't know that they've done any that NHTSA has. Maybe they have. I don't know. They haven't done much, and IIHS has clearly done quite a bit more. So we appreciate the fact that they've done this. One of the things you'll see is that the passenger vehicle can strike that rear of the truck, which, let's be clear, there's a number of reasons why that may happen. Driver might have been distracted. Okay, we're not assigning fault here. The hope is, consistent with the National Roadway Safety Strategy, that no one needs to die. So what do we need to do to promote safer vehicles, whether that be required AEB on all passenger and large trucks, which is underway, so that's going to help, but as well as safer vehicles to prevent death when this does happen. So you can strike at a range, I mean, obviously between 1 to 100%, but broadly speaking for testing purposes, 30, 50, 100%. Okay, so that's good. We're going to revisit that. But the recommendation that Congress made in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the bipartisan infrastructure law, is that NHTSA impose a 30% strength requirement, so that if you're offset that much as a passenger vehicle, you could strike that guard and still have your protections of your passenger vehicle engaged, like your bumper and your airbags, crumple zones, and that you're not going to pass through under said trailer. So we're going to focus on the rear, and one of the things, I'm going to go back, that is also somewhat new is this left-hand panel. Lee, could you walk us through this? And then we're going to watch a video that our friends from the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance shared with us.
Sure, this is just a typical underride carriage. Notice the reflective tape. This looks brand new. It's certainly not an older model. So there is some strength to this. But one of the problems is with doing inspections all the time is that there's not a whole lot of uniformity. On some of the underride protection guards, you'll see the pieces spot welded onto the back of the trailer. Others, there's a bead weld, and still again, others are just bolted on. So the strength of which they can prevent the penetration varies from trailer to trailer. And that's part of the problem. But even at a higher speed crash, these things, they just buckle. They just fold right underneath the trailer and don't slow the car down much at all.
And I think what's critical here on this panel is, I believe, I could be off on this, either late 21 or early 22, the rear underride guard inspection was added to the annual inspection checklist. And so when a level 1 inspection is now done, the rear underride guard is supposed to be part of that inspection, and you can be penalized and have violations. We do have some numbers. I hope I kept my notes on that. Long story short, you may not be surprised to know not many are being captured. Like, it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of all inspections, which leads us to speculate that perhaps people aren't aware of this change. And actually, Lee has some information on that as well. And or perhaps, if I can call it a throwaway violation, right? If you were speeding for 15, you get written up for 10. Something doesn't sound right based on field experience and what we're seeing in the data. So we'll come back to that, but I want to advance to this video that CVSA was so kind to share with us. Do I hit play or do you guys hit play? Thank you. Yeah, why not? Clap. Woo!
Uh-oh, we clapped too soon.
It's too soon. That's okay.
I just wanted to show you this rear end protection that I'm looking at, and I wanted to show you how new it is. So it's the best thing I've ever seen, and look at it. I'm measuring it here. I've got 4 inches from the side of this one to the side of the trailer. I've got my constitution tape all the way along here. Looking at the other side. Let's see, what's the height of it? 17 inches. That sounds good to me. I'm gonna go around here. Oh, here's my certification label. It's got the maker of the trailer on here, the address, and manufactured in 0418. It's got my continuity tape across the back. Look, it's bolted on this one. Some of them are welded, but this one's bolted. Bolts are tight. They're all there. None are missing. Best rear end you're ever gonna see. Brand new. You could eat off of it. So really, that's all there is to it.
They'd like to have fun at CVSA.
And let us know what you think.
Okay, we're gonna leave that there for now because we're focused on the rear. Best rear she's seen, as she said. Yeah, hey, that's her experience. But I want to turn it over briefly here to Eric. Lee mentioned about the variability in the strength. Again, to IIHS's credit, that I would argue acts in a more aggressive interest of public safety. They started a voluntary program to really encourage folks to opt for stronger guards. Could you touch on that?
Sure thing. So, speaking of doing things before panelists were alive, my company's been testing rear underride guards longer than I've been alive. I actually brought some slides, Ectochrome slides of some of our tests, which are quite interesting if anyone wants to see it. But anyways, we resumed testing in around 2010, I believe it was, and what we were discovering was that a lot of guards were just not strong enough. So yeah, they might, pass all the measurements and all that, but when you strike it, they just break. Either they break or they break off the trailer. And so we instituted a program, an award called the Tough Guard Award in 2017, I believe. And when we showed our initial tests to the trailer manufacturers, I wasn't in that meeting, but what I've heard about it, they basically took one look at that and just said, yeah, we can do better, and they very quickly did. So now all 8 of the major trailer manufacturers make the trailers that get our award. And an interesting part of that is the 30% overlap is part of that award. So in NHTSA's final rule, they decided not to do the 30% overlap because there was concern that doing well there means moving the structural members further apart, and you might not do well in the center test. But to get our award, you need to do well in the center test, and they're all doing it.
Yeah, it does beg a question. And so for everyone's awareness, we were not the only ones You guys opted not to. Ourselves and advocates for highway and auto safety both petitioned NHTSA to reconsider the final rule that was published to require that 30% overlap. As we know, it's not too burdensome to industry manufacturers to do it. So we'll see what happens with that, but that's something we're still actively working on in the name of safety. I think, any more comments on rear impact guards from you all?
I would just make one point about Underride Guards in general and their strength. They need to be really strong because their job is simply to keep the car out from under the truck. And also when they engage with approximately the bumper of the vehicle, that's when crumple zones can do their thing. That's what airbag timing is based on. That's what keeps the impact from engaging the structural safety cage of the car and let it do its job. That's where seatbelt pretensioners and load limiters do their job. So cars are designed to withstand an impact with a concrete wall at relatively high speeds and possibly much higher than we actually test. So that's really the job of the Underride Guard.
Yep. No, thank you, Eric. We'll move on to this video here momentarily, but this is definitely a bit more controversial here in the States, at least, not so much abroad. We'll revisit that. But the topic of side underride guards or lateral protective devices, which are different, and we'll touch on that distinction. But I just want to take it to the panel here. Maybe Jennifer, you could start. What are your initial thoughts about the need or lack of need for side underride guards?
I certainly obviously do not have the experiences or the education that the two gentlemen sitting beside of me have, but I have experienced what it's like for somebody to be killed in an underride crash. And I think what's so concerning to me is, the things we're hearing, talk about, it's not doable. The car can get the trailer can get hung up on the rail guards and the costs that are involved. And, from my perspective, is what cost do all of you put on your lives and the lives of your loved ones if they come in contact with the side or the rear of a truck? So, they stated in 1953, 1969, that side guards would be added and there would be further research, and it still hasn't been done. So this is a problem that was recognized a long time ago, and I believe my dad was going 41 miles an hour. If that truck had it, which there were none during that time, but if that same crash happened to somebody else right now, that guard would have worked. And I think it's time for us to put the safety of us and our loved ones above what the costs may be. And the other thing that's very, concerning, about the side underride guards is that, there's just no protection there. I also want to say I agree with Lee in that conspicuity has got to be a part of the package too, to get this done. But it appears that there just seems to be excuses for not doing this. You've got other countries that have done it. This is the United States of America, and they're stopping something that could be saving people every single day. And it's up to us and those of us that care about these issues to just demand that we do better.
Let me throw in something there. I do a lot of expert testimony and consulting with plaintiffs' attorneys and also defense attorneys, so I work both sides of the docket. And one thing I'm noticing now, some of the upcoming legislation, or litigation rather, is plaintiffs' attorneys are suing the trailer manufacturers for not having underride carriages. That's the newest thing I see coming, because everybody knows the technology exists, everybody knows the underride carriages exist. Why aren't you using them? One particular Dallas attorney that I've worked with, he has brought 4 of those to trial. 2 times the jury came back with a real heavy verdict for the plaintiffs, and 2 times the jury came back with $0. He's batting 500. And do you think he's going to stop batting 500? Absolutely not. So for those of you who have, because this is a room of influential people, no doubt about it, you have the influence, you have the means to talk about this issue. If nothing else, putting his savings life to the side, which is certainly not the right thing to do, but even not paying attention to that aspect of it, because everybody thinks it won't happen to them, the litigation is coming your way. And the longer these accidents keep on happening, and the more we show that this underride carriages work, the bigger the risk the trailer manufacturers are running. And of course, the trucking company itself is going to be brought into that litigation.
Yeah, and I think I have to bring up quick, sorry, Jennifer, we'll kick it back over. We're not going to show it, but Frontline did, in collaboration with ProPublica, a very powerful documentary on underride crashes this past year. You can go to Frontline PBS or ProPublica's website, and you can find it pretty easily. One of the things, I mean, there was a few disturbing things that came out of that investigative reporting, but one of them, through the deposition process, and I won't say which manufacturer, but you'll see it in the video, gosh, 90s, I think, late 90s maybe. They colluded, the manufacturers and others, knowing that this was an increasing problem. They agreed to instead focus on defense litigation strategies than develop prototypes that might meet the need. It's on camera in a formal deposition, and you can see the guy. I mean, it's a memo that they shared amongst themselves. He has to read it in a very embarrassed fashion, that he's been caught. So that's the reality of what we've been dealing with. And so when you hear the pain in Jennifer's voice, it's because it's real that folk actors have acted in bad faith for their own interests at the expense of people that they didn't care about. So that's a very real thing. Jennifer, what were you going to share?
I was just also going to say, this is a heartbreaking thing too. We don't really know how many people are getting killed in underride crashes. And the powers to be that don't want us to know want it that way because they don't want to have to spend the money to do it. So they're trying to even hide the numbers. We don't even know how many people we're actually killing, but we certainly know one thing, it's a lot more than what the numbers show.
Yeah,
We can get a sense of the numbers. We know that underride is very common when there are fatal crashes with trucks. And we know there are somewhere around 600 deaths in which a passenger vehicle rear-ended a truck.
Yep.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 deaths in which there was a front-to-side car-to-truck crash. So we suspect a very large proportion of those involve underride. So we may not know the precise exact number, but we certainly know the upper bound of that number, and it's too many.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, I know we moved off rear underride, but I found those stats, and I just have to share them. Out of nearly 3 million inspections on that new annual inspection requirement to have the rig, rear impact guard, inspected, 2,630 noted violations out of 3 million. So that's an 8 millionth of, let me count the zeros, that's 3 zeros and an 8, 0.0008. And Lee, I know we're going back here before going forward to side, but you shared something with me this past week that I was pretty surprised by. Why don't you go ahead and tell me what you told me?
I contacted a friend of mine in the trucking industry. He's a safety man. And I said, y'all do your own inspections. Can you send me a list of what it is your inspector does? Because everybody loves checklists. Send me a copy of your checklist to show how it is documented that you're looking at the rear underride. So he sends me this list, and I'm looking, and I'm looking, and I'm looking at it several times, and it's not listed on there at all. So I look at the bottom right corner, and it says the issue date of this particular form was January 8th of 2012. And I don't know how many times it's happened, but I'm quite certain that there have been several updates that the federal government has said, hey, by the way, inspect this too. Look at this. The most recent of which is that rear underride guard that has not made the list of this particular company. And I'm certain they are not alone in that issue. Most people don't pay attention to that. They're all, it's always being updated, but the forms that the inspector uses is not always being updated. And that's one of the things that you as safety people need to bring to the attention of your inspectors.
Thank you. And just, in case you didn't know this, I always find it interesting. Carriers, either through a certified internal in-house investigator, or not investigator, but inspector, can do those themselves or outsource it to a third party to inspect their vehicles annually. And then they're required to keep those on file I think for 3 years, could be wrong, might be 5, but at least 3 years by federal regs in case someone asks for them. Just leave that aside. There's no verification. The system, because of the massive number of carriers, the small amount of resources FMCSA has, it really is a trust system. And we've got folks using forms, I don't think in bad faith, from 2012. Okay, so it just point out that there's something wrong with the system we use to make sure what we've asked for, minimally for safety, is even happening. And so that's disturbing as well.
And one of the other things, because I do live in a world of litigation, is you can bet your bottom dollar that those inspection forms are part of the discovery process. They're going to ask, when was the last time this truck was inspected? And I want to see the paperwork in which that particular trailer was inspected. So if you're not inspecting it, or if you have a list that hasn't been updated in 10 years, is that going to be an issue? Absolutely. Is the jury going to find out about that? Absolutely. It's in your own best interest to make sure that your list is updated and that everything on there that the government requires is on that checklist.
Thank you, Lee. Let's go ahead and watch this video. We'll have one more question on site underrides and get to a different topic. I know it's a lot. It's a lot to unpack. Go ahead and hit play.
So this test is conducted at 40 miles an hour with a standard skirt here, as in no guard. The car simply goes right under, and the dummy takes a large truck to the face, which breaks the steel and plastic in our dummy, but kills people otherwise. And they're real people.
And to put a face on that, which I know is a little disturbing, just remember James Mooney's face from earlier in the presentation.
So now with the Angel Wing Underride Guard, the only one on the market we're aware of, it does its job. It's like hitting a wall, and that's what the car is literally designed to do. So in all the footage here, now it looks just like the regular crash test into a wall, and the dummy is well protected, and probably a human would be almost entirely uninjured. So that's a really big difference. It's not just that you're, some minor difference in injury. It's completely fatal versus potentially not injured at all.
No, thank you, Eric. And why don't you keep the floor here? So if you're not aware, NHTSA somewhat surprisingly issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking for side underride guards. I want to hear from everyone. What's your reaction to what was in that proposal?
Well, what was in there was obviously a cost-benefit analysis, which a lot of people have been saying, well, the cost-benefit analysis shows that it's not worth installing these things, or mandating these things, I should say. But the benefits were wildly underestimated because I think NHTSA tried very hard to identify exactly what was relevant and exclude what was not relevant. For example, one of the things that was excluded was any crash above 40 miles an hour because we tested it at 40 miles an hour, it clearly works. Their estimate of effectiveness at 41 miles per hour is 0%, which is not how engineering works. I agree that if you strike the vehicle at 80 miles an hour, there's a good chance it won't work. I'd also say there's a decent chance it's still beneficial. But that's the type of thing, and I think trying to zero in too much on the exact scenarios that would be effective versus not is probably well-intentioned, but it's an example of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Thank you, Eric. Jennifer, Lee?
I think what I would say to each and every one of you is, let's say you knew or you or somebody you loved was going to be in that crash. Do you want to take your chances with that guard even at 40 miles per hour or not have one at all? It's just insane to me that if anybody can be saved, that we should have that guard. And I completely agree with what you're saying. To say that at 40 miles per hour it saves people, at 41 it does nothing. That doesn't even make. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a mathematician, that makes no sense whatsoever. It's common sense tells you that if that saves anybody, if it's your loved one, you want it on there.
And also just a real quick technical data note, I mean, when we say 40 versus 41 or any impact speed, We don't really know in this sort of crash data. We're not looking at EDRs and electronic data recorders and so on and so forth. So, I think that's another example of putting too much trust in the precision of those estimates.
And before kicking it back over to Lee, I have a thought that maybe it's all wet, but since the OPM, oh gosh, what was the mandate? During the Clinton administration for OMB, IRA to conduct that cost-benefit analysis for proposed rules, right? And knowing that we don't have data that is reliable on the precise number of underride fatalities of any kind, side or rear. One of the things that I think is potentially true, which we can never prove, we got the requirement for a rear underride guard, no strength attached to it, 1953 maybe. And then eventually, I think it was early 90s, maybe early 2000s. I think early 2000s, we got strength requirements for the first time. So it actually had to do something, withstand an impact. I wonder, Eric, in your view, given the lack of data, if we tried to make a requirement for Mansfield guards or rear impact guards now, knowing we don't have data, do you think we would even pass the current requirements for a CBA that are in place?
I don't know is the honest answer.
It's possible we wouldn't. The only point I want to make is it's possible we wouldn't.
It is possible. I
Yeah.
think these regulatory impact analyses they have to do, again, well-intentioned, but I think can be very difficult. And I think it's just like in the studies we do or others do. I think when you have imperfect data, you account for that, whether by relying more heavily on engineering judgment than on statistics, or by looking at a range of data and upper bounds and things like that, instead of coming up with one precise estimate.
But yet, I don't think anyone in this room would argue a rear impact guard is not necessary. But there's a version of history, I think, an alternate reality that could exist where we don't have them and we can't get them. I just think that's interesting. Lee, what are your thoughts on the side impact?
For almost 8 years, I was the police officer who got called out from home in the middle of the night when somebody got killed in an accident. And most of the time, and I can't think of any accident, underride collision that occurred where somebody got killed where it was under 40 miles an hour. So to discount or discard every crash that happened at greater than 40 miles an hour is absolutely ludicrous. I really don't understand that. But I also want to emphasize that the underride guard is still part of the equation. You can't yield to what you can't see. If there's a trailer straddling the road, and if you can't see it, you're going to proceed towards it at the speed limit you're traveling at. They've got to be able to see it, and the way they see it is with the conspicuity tape. So those two things got to work in concert with each other. If we can slow down the car, let's say it's doing 60 miles an hour, if we have 2 or 3 seconds to slow down, then we can slow down to a speed of 40 miles an hour in which the occupants will survive. At 60 miles an hour, they won't. If you hit a bridge pillar, if you hit a wall at 60 miles an hour, the occupants, the delta V is way too high in order for the occupants to survive. But if we can get it to slow it down to 40 miles an hour, it's a survivable collision.
Perfect. Well, go ahead.
One more thing. Part of slowing it down, again, talking with other things working in concert together, we have updated our testing program for front crash prevention on passenger vehicles. Part of that update is increasing the test speeds and detecting a semi-trailer. So we do a rather gutsy maneuver on our test track now with a stationary semi-trailer. We're not testing all the way to the point where the car applies the brakes, because that's very, very dangerous. But we look and see if it issues a warning and detects the trailer, and then we swerve out of the way. So we're going to release the first results for small SUVs in the coming months. And I think that's going to have a big impact on this issue.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. That's tremendous.
No pun intended, I'm sorry.
Right, yeah, I hear you. Just briefly on the side, and we're going to turn to braking here, but it's just timely that this is converging. The item, well, there's a lot of items, but the thing that really bothered me most about that proposal is that same bill, the infrastructure law, required NHTSA to conduct testing, new research is the actual language, to understand feasibility benefits, et cetera, of side underride guards. There's been no new research, no testing. They proceeded with this AMPRM, summarizing IIHS's work, looking at FARs, looking at what they have, and said that that met the requirement. To me, that's not new research. I mean, I don't know in whose mind in this room that is new research. That's summarizing what you have. And so I think it's a really weak effort at something that's incredibly important. One more thing, just so you can see it. We'll skip. Oh, there we go. Large trucks in Italy, or really the European Union, anywhere, they are required to have these lateral protective devices. So when you hear LPD versus side underride guard, the main difference is that the LPD, and we do have San Francisco, New York, like dump trucks, where you have more urban interactions are being required to have these, which is great. These are designed for pedestrian survivability. That is the chief engineering outcome. Of course, it has ancillary benefits to vehicles. But I would just point out that these trucks with these guards, which are comparable, in fact, the same is what someone at Volpe told me, to the clearance proposed for side underride guard. We have yet to hear of any trailers in the EU getting hung up on railroad tracks. We've yet to hear of onerous maintenance requirements for their LPDs because they're hitting debris all the time. I would just, I'm just pointing out, there's proof of concept that for many years now, this isn't like a one-year thing, that trailers in developed countries can have this sort of equipment, and the world doesn't stop. So let's move on to brakes. According to FMCSA, roughly 60% of all fatalities in a large truck crash occur when the front of a large truck strikes a passenger vehicle. And the results are frequently catastrophic. Like you saw in Board Member Graham's presentation, and I think Jennifer and Lee would agree to this as well, at least for us, I would say 75% of the stories of our victims that we work with, they're in stopped or slowed traffic, a crash, a work zone, and semi-driver going with a fully loaded rig crashes into them without slowing, and their loved ones don't survive. It is by far the most common crash that we help people with. And the data also, I would point out, bears this out. Again, IIHS, thank you, has found that 97% of large truck and passenger vehicle crash deaths, those deaths are to the occupants of the passenger vehicle, something Board Member Graham also shared. Yet, I mean, and this really throws me, during CVSA's recent road check, and this is almost always true, when carriers and drivers are told it's coming, right? Like, it's coming, get ready for the blitz. 25% of those trucks had brake system violations, and nearly 20% of all trucks inspected were placed out of service, which is the national average for out of service vehicle rate. And the most common violation is always brake violations. So I think it's clear, even from a data-driven approach, not just a victim kind of feel-good, make things right perspective, that braking is an incredibly important issue that we need to do better with. Properly maintained effective brakes have been and continue to be a critical life safety issue, and I would like to hear what your life experience says about this.
We did a study looking at risk factors for large truck crashes with inspection forms and a matched case control design, blah, 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 a strong study. One of the things we found was that brake violations, the out of service brake violations quadruple people's crash risk. And it might be even a little bit higher because the out of service part was a smaller sample. For the total sample, all violations, it was something like an 8-fold increase in crash risk if there were brake violations.
Thank you. Lee?
I do a lot of post-collision inspections where we either air up the entire system or air up chamber to chamber. First thing I want to say is the automatic slack adjusters have definitely helped the braking effectiveness of a truck. It's made a huge difference. The other difference that I'm seeing is a lot of the tractors are going to disc brakes instead of the regular foundation brake system, and they're much more effective and efficient but you can't inspect them because there's no push rod travel to be measured on a disc brake, because a push rod itself is housed inside the mechanism. So we're not able to get a good reading on if anybody's disc brakes are out of alignment because you can't measure them. But I'd say a lot of the vehicles that we do post-collision forensic inspections on, a lot of them have braking issues. And I don't know if it's because they've been involved in that particular collision, but I would say at least 20% of the trucks that we inspect have braking issues, and if that contributed to the cause of the collision.
Thank you. Jennifer, any thoughts from your experience or victims that you interact with?
And as you've probably noticed, I'm always speaking for victims and survivors. But one of the things is equipping all trucks, not regardless of size, all trucks with emergency braking. It'll make our neighborhood streets safer. It'll make it better for pedestrians, bicyclists, children, older adults, and for other vulnerable road users. So, there's a tremendous advantage to that. And then in some of the things we've read, there's companies that have said that they've had a 71% reduction in rear end collisions after using automatic emergency braking. Others have said that the severity of rear end crashes has reduced as much as 95%. This works. We're getting it in our cars. Why would you want a truck that's 80,000 pounds to not have something that your 4,000 pound car has? I go back to just common sense. Absolutely, we need automatic emergency braking.
Thank you, Lee.
Just one more thing I want to add is that as a society, we keep on inventing more and more ways to not pay attention while we're driving. It really amazes me. Everything from, phones, of course, is the biggest culprit, but we keep on inventing more and more ways to make it worse. I don't understand why there is any argument in trying to compensate for the human animal that is behind the wheel and pick up the slack of when we're not paying attention. Nobody expects you to stare directly in front of you 100% of the time. We all adjust the radio, the heater, our seats, look in rear view mirrors. So that's part of the experience of driving. So why not have something that can add to the safety aspect of it?
Yeah, exactly. We've heard about redundant systems multiple times throughout the course of a week, and that's certainly a part of it, right? Better, safer trained drivers who are not impaired, not inattentive, combined with technology is going to be the best outcome, probabilistic outcome for safety. And I just want to point out again, IIHS's research, they kind of led the way with class 7-8 research showing like a 50% survival rate, reduction of injury. And the NHTSA also did, to their credit, medium duty truck study, and I think that came out at 40, or maybe I have that flipped, and Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong. All that to say, the research shows that this can work on all classes of motor vehicles. And to NHTSA's credit, even though Congress only required AEB to be required on newly manufactured vehicles for class 7-8 trucks, NHTSA said, you know what, we know this, it's Lee's point. We're going to require it in all passenger vehicles, and we're going to require it in all trucks. And it's going to be a game changer, just like board member Graham shared, and we agree wholeheartedly. And so what I have here to share is a video that NHTSA shared. And those of you who know Ryan Poston, he's your voiceover voice for this, when they did the press release on the new rule for automatic emergency braking in heavy trucks. So go ahead.
Automatic emergency braking systems use various sensors and subsystems on a heavy vehicle to detect when a frontal crash may be imminent. That collision could be a rear-end crash with a slower moving vehicle, a vehicle that suddenly braked,
That was close.
or a vehicle that stopped. When a vehicle is detected, Automatic emergency braking is applied automatically if the driver has not applied the brakes or the driver has not applied enough braking force to avoid the crash. Automatic emergency braking systems are designed to save lives and reduce crashes on our roadways.
All right, kudos to NHTSA. We like to give credit as well whenever possible to our government partners. So with that, I think the question here is, for those of you, again, who don't know, there's this new AMPRM. We're expecting a final rule, fingers crossed, before April of 2024 for automatic emergency braking in all large trucks. And we saw different classes there represented and configurations in the video, effective on all types. Now I'm going to defer to Eric and Lee on the specifics because it's highly technical, right? The engineering involved, but it is robust. The performance standards NHTSA is proposing, and tough to their credit. And I just want to hear what you all think about what you saw in that proposal. Could it be improved? Is it great the way it is? Shoot.
Yeah, let me start by mentioning the effectiveness of AEB. We did a study on Class 8 trucks and found that AEB, and again, this was a very careful study design with 60 carriers traveling several billion miles and a couple thousand crashes. It reduces the rate of front to rear crashes by about 40%. And one thing that we know about AEB, even in cars and so forth, is that it's not just crash avoidance. We always talk about avoidance, but it's also crash mitigation. Because if you can shave off speed for crashes that still do happen, that can have major benefits. Based on our study design, which involved video driver monitoring data and all that, lots of data, we actually had the speeds. So we could calculate the average reduction in speed between the time of intervention, whether that was a warning or an auto brake, and the impact. And that was on average about 50%, which is huge. And in terms of what was in the NPRM, we were also pleased that NHTSA decided to include all vehicles above 10,000 pounds. I think that's a really big opportunity. One difference between that, and also pleased that they increased the testing speeds. But one difference between that and the passenger vehicle proposed rule was passenger vehicles proposed to mandate pedestrian detection. Trucks did not. And we commented in support of this and in support of that decision because we don't want to delay the rulemaking while we verify that aspect of the technology. These technologies develop incrementally over time, and that's just sort of a reality. We could always wish we had the perfect technology that we could mandate, but I think sitting and waiting for it is the wrong move. So we support NHTSA's rulemaking in that.
Well said,
aspect.
Eric. Jennifer?
Once again, I hope that all of you leave today and you just think about yourselves and your families, and that everybody that's in the situation I'm in, all of our victim survivors in the Truck Safety Coalition, never thought this would happen to them. And all of these things they're truly common sense. And why it's been so difficult to get them accomplished, I don't understand. But I've never had the opportunity to be in front of a group of people such as you all that care about this issue, and you're educated, and your knowledge and your abilities to help us make these changes. And I really appreciate being here today and want to thank each and every one of you and ask for your help as we move these things through.
Thank you. Me?
The only addition I would make to that is we can't discount adverse weather. Trucks usually don't stop when fog or rain or snow comes out. They keep moving as they should. So if we had the automatic braking, it makes it, the vehicle engages it before the driver even sees it due to heavy fog or heavy rain. That will just add to the prevention and the mitigation.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot we could obviously talk about. I'm going to kind of open it up a little bit to, well, long-standing technologies such as using speed limiters that have been capable since early 2000s. We know that rulemaking is ongoing. That could be something. It could be advanced driver assistance systems, could be inward, outward-facing cameras, could be fatigue detection, smart devices that are helping with telematics for carriers and their drivers. It could be ignition interlock technology, which we're seeing get developed for passenger vehicles. I just kind of want to open the floor to what's an emerging technology that you're most either excited about or can't wait to learn more about as more research and efficacy is learned about it. Anyone?
Well, one of the things that we do, it's a standard thing, is we download the ECM on a truck, and there's a lot of them.
ECM?
Engine control module. It contains the event data of what happened before the collision. There's 59 seconds of pre-collision data, which gives you a real good idea of what's going on inside the cab, and 15 seconds of post-collision data. So it's an awful lot of information. But one of the things that I'm seeing over the last couple of years is because mechanics and drivers know that there's data that's been recorded when they've been involved in a collision, is that the day before we go to do our inspection and download the data from the vehicle, there's 3 recorded sudden decelerations. And it is obvious that that's no coincidence. Nobody has 3 hard brake events, less than a mile and several minutes apart. So what they're doing is they think they're being smart by going out and deleting the evidence, because it'll only hold 3 different events, right? So the next time there's another sudden deceleration, the oldest one drops off, and then the next one drops off, and then the next one drops off. So what you have is 3 hard braking events that happen because the time is recorded on these things and the miles. You have 3 hard brake events that occur in a very short amount of time and a very short amount of distance. So that is just without a doubt an attempt to destroy the record that was created during the sudden deceleration event or the collision. That looks horrible to juries. Everybody knows exactly what you're doing when you do that. And please talk to your drivers and tell them what a bad idea that is. Because even if they weren't doing anything wrong, if they're doing a speed limit, that maybe they didn't react as quickly, it destroys what they were doing right. So if we have good data on the collision instead of 3 intentional stops, because when you show that to the jury, that somebody deliberately destroyed the event data that pertained to this crash, what is the jury going to do to that trucking company and to that driver? It makes it look terrible. So stress your drivers, mechanics, if they're ever so inclined, don't do it. It's a bad idea.
And then, Lee, I'm just going to prompt you. You brought up the issue of EDRs as a requirement in large trucks, and that's currently not. Is that correct? Could you touch on that?
Right, it is. In cars, Part 563 requires cars to have airbag control modules to control the airbag, but it also records the data. In a car crash, you'll get 5 seconds of pre-collision data where it'll talk about the speed, the engine RPM, when the brakes are applied, and more recently, within the last couple of years, it also includes steer data. So if we know the car is making a lane change, going into a curve, it records the degree in which the vehicle is being maneuvered. And that's very good information. Trucks don't have steer data, but they do have brake data, engine RPM, clutch engagement, percentage of horsepower that's being used. So there's an awful lot of information. So it's not all that difficult to take the data from one vehicle, the data from another vehicle, and you can piece together exactly what happened and have accurate numbers, not just, it seems to me like this truck has 37 miles an hour worth of damage to it. We have impact speeds, and we have before impact speeds, and when the brakes are being applied. So please stress to your drivers to not try and manipulate that data by destroying what should be the event data from that crash.
Thanks. And NHTSA did, and it was above my pay grade and my intelligence level. They did do a report recently. I think a lot of European manufacturers, or there's a requirement in Europe that the large trucks have EDRs in their engines, the capability to withdraw that data. And for some reason, and it was a legitimate reason, but one I didn't quite understand, we lack the willingness or the means. There's some reason why it's hard to do that stateside. And it's just an interesting thing to be aware of, because it would greatly improve learning. I mean, we're data driven. That's what you keep hearing from folks, right? We got to use the data. It's another situation where we're choosing not to obtain the data. Jennifer, any technology issue you want to touch on?
I think for me, this has happened to me a lot. You're driving down the interstate, and where I live in North Carolina, sometimes there's 8 lanes on both sides. And, you see this driver that's kind of weaving kind of back and forth, and I immediately am like, the guy's falling asleep. I would like to see, a retrofit, and I would like to see driver assist and for sleep detection for everybody, not just truck drivers, but cars, everything. Those are 2 things I'd like to see happen.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, your retrofit comment reminded me of something. In the study of AEB, we also looked at some carriers that had warning-only systems, and those were similarly effective. So that's not an excuse to say, let's just use the cheaper system, but there's a benefit, because if I have a truck and I want to invest in a safety technology, if I want AEB, I need to spend $200,000 on a brand new truck or a used one, whatever. I need to replace the vehicle. But some FCW systems can be installed on existing vehicles. I had one on my old car that cost $1,000 installed, and it worked really well. So there's an opportunity for people to make a relatively small investment in safety and get a pretty big benefit out of that. But I would say in terms of other technologies, it's not a technology per se, but speed. Speed limiters is part of a way to address that. Automated enforcement is another way. Legislative issues, addressing speed limits is one. I think we need to remember that all countermeasures work better at lower speeds. And it's just central to everything in highway safety, which is one of the reasons it's so prominent in the safe systems line of thinking.
No, thank you, Eric. And we certainly support the speed limiter rulemaking. And then the thing that I would add to this, and then we'll just open it up to questions, something that surprised me in the past year, well, maybe past 2 years, I saw the data point that 60% of drivers after a fatal crash are not tested for drugs or alcohol. And at first I thought that was just a state-local issue, like the local on-scene officer has the discretion to be like, you need to be checked out, or you could, you're okay, be on your way if the vehicle is drivable or the truck is drivable. And then I did some more research, and I probably should have already known this, but there's actually a CFR, a Code of Federal Regulation statute, that states the carrier is the responsible party to ensure that the driver is drug tested within 8 hours. Screened for alcohol within 8 hours, drug tested, I believe, within 33. And whatever, it declares that if the on-scene officer directs you to have that test done, that's a perfectly valid test. You don't need to have 2 tests as long as you get the valid test completed. And in talking with some folks, what I've learned, well, let me go back to the statute. The end of the statute says, however, if this is impractical, please keep a memo on file for why you chose not to have your driver tested for either of these 2 things within the time frame allotted. So it's really it doesn't mean anything, right? And I think that's part of why we have, it's not the only reason, but it's part of why we have this gap in really understanding the scope and scale. I mean, we make all this noise, hey, we don't have data on underride, so we can't do anything. We just don't really have data that we need on fatalities caused by drugged or impaired driving, which is highly concerning. And then there's other research being done by other parties, which I'm sure you've seen, on the efficacy of hair follicle testing, which suggests that it's far worse of a situation than we might think. And so I just say that to say I find this all highly concerning. And what's happening frequently, which is a good, I guess, defense for folks, it's Abbott Costello fans. We have any of those here? When it comes to, well, why didn't the test get done? You'll have the carrier saying, oh, well, I thought the police were going to make him do it, or her do it. And you have the police saying, oh, make sure it got done. So if this ever ends up in court, you kind of have this whole who's on first, what's on second situation, despite the fact that the statute is very clear and whose responsibility it is, and there are 0 consequences. Now, maybe a jury might decide there's consequences, but there are 0 statutory consequences for failure to get this done. And I just think that's completely unacceptable and something more people need to be aware of, which is why I share it with you. And I would argue that whether you're an owner operator or a carrier, you might have some perverse incentives for why you don't want that done. So there needs to be penalties for failing to get this done, in my view. Okay, it's time for questions. We appreciate, sitting through this discussion. We do have some announcements at the end, so please do not run out, but we'd love to take questions and pontificate on whatever you want to talk about.
Okay, so it's more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but I'm curious everyone's thoughts on this. Is one of the things that I find is that actually talking about comprehensive crash costs is extremely valuable to the conversation, particularly when you're talking about whether it's rulemaking, policy, or potential legislation. And it seems like often in our industry we don't use those numbers enough. Particularly when I talk to, I'll just say higher level officials, and I say, in my state, a fatal crash is almost $13 million. They are shocked that it is that much. Meanwhile, we often in our industry talk about cost of congestion, and particularly in Midwest states, right? And if you don't get a lot of congestion in your state, usually your crash costs dwarf your congestion costs. And I'm just kind of curious why, those numbers aren't used in kind of that full argument, analysis, advocating standpoint, and used enough, I guess.
Well, I certainly have thoughts on that, but I want to kick it to these folks.
Well, first I would ask you, that $13 million, does that include a jury verdict, or is that just?
So it's all standardized, right? And then states can adjust, right, for income levels within their state, but it usually is the full economic cost. So it's the incident response, the medical response, the loss of income associated with the victims. They kind of standardize these numbers, but generally, like, I know our state's number is not that much different than the national number,
Sure.
The national average.
Any thoughts? I mean, I can chime in for sure. If you don't,
I think not crashing is good for business.
So, I mean, simply speaking, a few things. Like, one, the cost of a statistical life that NHTSA is currently using is right around 12. It might even be 13. It's between 12 and 13 million. So that alone, if there was only one fatality, is what we're dealing with. And I would just say it's hard to keep this brief, but I will. You brought it up, so let's go there. The minimum insurance required. I mean, you know it, right? For property carrying vehicles, CMVs. Do you know it? 750,000. Has not changed since 1980. It was implemented in 1985, proposed 1980. But surely costs have not increased for medical care or consumer prices since that time, right? Of course they have, right? The whole idea, when you read back on these even congressional reports, correctly, I think, the government at the time realized, as they deregulated FMCSA, as we know, right, under-resourced given the scope and scale of carriers and drivers out there, they can't handle what's about to happen. So we need to rely on the insurance industry to vigorously vet carriers, because if they're willing to underwrite them, they probably met some threshold for safety comfort for that to happen. Well, and this is meant to avoid, the carriers going to have skin in the game, because if they can afford that insurance, they should be able to afford proper maintenance and safety plans for their fleet, whether it's large or small. But B, it should also avoid a race to the bottom on prices. Just curious, show of hands. Who would raise their hand and say we are living in an era where we have a race to the bottom on freight prices? You don't think so? The cheapest price possible? That's what we're all trying to get? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's what's happened. The failure to increase that insurance requirement and externalize those costs onto states and onto victims has allowed this to happen. So you've got folks out there who probably shouldn't be operating. I'm not against any particular operator, but if you can't afford the cost to operate because safety has a cost, well, that maybe you should work for someone else who can afford those overhead costs. So I would just throw that out there to that point. And commonly what we see in exemptions for industry and rulemaking, industry is really good at calculating the cost of congestion, whatever it may be. Rarely do they disclose the benefit. I'll give you an example. It's an Iowa-based company. I know we're in the Midwest. I won't say who. They wanted an exemption for something. They got it with a paucity of data for why they should be able to have it. Really no reason given for why their alternative. You always have to have a equivalent or safer idea for if you're going to get that exemption, how are we going to ensure safety is maintained? They got this exemption for 7 years really based on very little. Their violation history was not impressive during this time either. Their argument was it'll help them be more efficient. Do you think they're ever asked by FMCSA to disclose the private benefit? What's the financial gain they will get by this exemption? Same thing with, I mean, I could go list by list for some of these. They are never asked to disclose their benefit. We all know what's going on. And I think they should have to say, if we're looking to skirt a safety thing here, why is it so compelling to you that you have this? I think it's fair. So along those lines, I just throw that out there. Other questions for folks?
Yes, this one is from Chris with KDOT, and he said, I understand the data is not complete in fatality and underride crashes. While everyone would like an absolute number to every question, many research projects have used models to provide an estimate. Is there an annual estimate on the numbers annually and broken down by rear or side underride?
I would say yes. I'll kick it to Eric, though. I think you've touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we just look at the impact configurations on fatalities, and we know a lot of those involve underride. We did a study, I forgot what that proportion was. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could multiply that and get a slightly more precise estimate than an upper bound, but we tend to use the upper bound unless we're doing an in-depth study that involves photographs and we can get much more precise.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is one of our former advisory board members, Dr. Elisa Braver, also former IIHS senior researcher, she did several papers that quantified, and I don't recall the process, I think it involved photos and the an acronym I can't think of right now, the database where you find these, that the underreporting of underride crashes, and I don't recall the distinction of rear versus side, was on a scale of 3 to 6 times. So there are some models out there, which again, I'd point out, not used in the side underride guard proposal. And I'm not even calling it a fudge factor because that's, Einstein made that up because whatever. I digress. It's an estimate. It's a projection based on real research that was disregarded in that proposal.
This question's for Eric. You talked about retrofit, and I'm Michael Christopher with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. We see a lot of small motor carriers that are operating on our roads. A lot of mom and pop operations, a lot of 1 to 5, 10 truck operations, and a lot of them don't see AEB as something they're going to be able to afford anytime soon. They're not buying brand new vehicles. And you talked about forward collision warning systems and how the effectiveness of them maybe hasn't been studied, but has a significant opportunity to impact these crashes. Do you see an opportunity for a collective campaign to educate these folks about the cost benefits of installing these systems that are available currently? I don't know a whole lot about the ones that are available. It sounds like you guys maybe know more. Do you know of any current campaigns that are going on to educate and create awareness so that you said it was $1,000? I hadn't heard that before for your own vehicle. I'd be curious to see how many trucking companies would be interested in implementing some sort of systems if the cost is so little.
Yes, I absolutely see opportunity there. And by the way, it was studied. It was a very similar effect as AEB. So we think that if they do put it on their vehicles, they will experience a benefit. I think there are a lot of avenues to do that. I think your partnership with ATA to Accelerate Now is a very good way to do that. And we're also exploring other opportunities, like perhaps working with a couple small fleets and doing a study where we put it on their trucks. I think that's an opportunity. The system I'm aware of that I had on my car, I believe the price was right around $1,000, and I've loosely heard there are some in the neighborhood of $1,500. So yeah, I think that's a big opportunity, and I think outlining what those systems are and approximately how much they cost is gathering that information would also be really useful for all of us.
I would also think that insurance companies would give an incentive to do something like that. I know because I have an alarm on my house, I get a percentage off on my homeowner's insurance. I would think that insurance companies would want to give truck owners some kind of discount.
Slamming on your brakes is usually not a great idea. If it's going to avoid a collision, obviously you want it to happen. Do you have any data on trucks braking when there isn't actually a vehicle in front of them? I know we've tested out some of them.
Sure.
We have had some of those instances happen. How often do they happen? Do you have
Sure.
any information on that?
I don't. I'll kick it to Eric, but I do know earlier versions of AAB, like you were talking about, technology evolves over time in iterations, even in passenger vehicles, right? I'm sure you may have experienced this if your car hasn't. You get those ghost activations on curves, and it kind of pisses you off, right? At least it does to me. So I get that's a valid concern a truck driver may have, or a passenger vehicle operator may have. But NHTSA, in my view, in their research of these systems, has gotten to the point where they're comfortable at that rate, and I don't know what it is. So it's a question I can try to get an answer for you on. I suspect NHTSA and their hundreds of pages in that rulemaking analysis might have something for you. Would be the keeper of that information if it exists, or the manufacturers like Daimler Truck North America or Bendix might have something on that for you. We can try to get it, but I would say the instance of ghost activations has gone down quite a bit, which is why there's confidence to proceed with the rulemaking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have any data on it either, but my understanding is it's been going down over time.
Jay Grimes, owner-operator, Independent Drivers Association. Michael, not sure if this is what you're going for, but next year if we had a trucking representative, small business representative up on this panel, that would be exciting at least. But thanks for Zach and Jennifer, all the issues that we get to work together on. Do want to acknowledge some different perspectives from the driver community on some of the issues we talked about today. Side underride mandate, speed limiter mandate, but plenty of other settings for those debates. On the side underride testing, Lee, you mentioned 40 miles an hour. Now IIHS has done a lot of testing with 35. Just talk about some of the testing you've done with those numbers. If you're thinking about doing more testing, different speeds, some of your findings.
Yeah, we don't have any immediate plans to do more testing, but we have thought about if more of these side underride guards come to the market, we would be willing to test those. We may do that at different speeds as well.
No, great question. Jay, good to finally meet you. We've only been on emails. It's long overdue, and I appreciate the partnership as well on the issues we work on. I'm going to bring it to a close, so you have some time before lunch, and please hold for some announcements here.